Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're in Europe and in the US. Welcome to our very final session, sharing session of the Mind of Plants Symposium. I hope you have been enjoying the symposium, and I hope you will enjoy this final part if you've just joined us. This session is titled Human and Plant Minds, and it somehow comes full circle because the first session had the same title. And so we wanted the final session to again speak to this connection between human and plant minds. In this session, we have 8 presenters, and I'm going to read you their names and the titles of their presentations, the subjects of their presentations, and then I will just go one by one, and every presenter has about 5 minutes to present. I would ask everyone to keep to the time so that we then in the end have the chance to have a short Q&A and interact with members of our audience. If you're joining us in the live stream, you can always ask your questions in the chat, and we will then convey your questions to our presenters. So as I said, we have 8 presentations. We have Afshin Akhtar-Khavari, who is going to speak to us on the suicide tree. We have Sabina Aguilera, who will speak on peyote. Rachel Gagen on iboga. Sarah Laborde on the apple. Jeremy Narby on cannabis. Matteo Politi on Ushpa Washa Sanago, Harriet Tarlo on samphire, and Giorgia Tresca on silver fir. Both Matteo and Giorgia are joining us, but they have an internet connection that is not too stable, so we'll play videos of them, but they will be hopefully here for the Q&A in the end of the session. So without further ado, and so that we have then really the chance to have a longer Q&A, I would like to ask Afshin to talk to us about the suicide tree. So you have the word, Afshin.
Thanks very much, Patricia. I want to start off by acknowledging the Turrbal and Yugara people as the First Nations people of the country where I am, which is known as Brisbane in Australia. I have to say it's really nice to see friends and colleagues today, and I've been learning so much from everyone. So thank you everyone for your various contributions to the various learnings we've been going through. I want to talk about the Akhtar-Khavari vesicular, or the simplified name of the suicide tree. I first read about this in a book by Richard Powers called The Over Story. I was actually on my way to Monica's house when I was reading this, and so it was fantastic to be able to have a chat. In that book, Powers talks about a character of Patricia Westerford who's celebrating the Akhtar-Khavari vesicular suicide tree for giving life to its next generation of seedlings by actually killing itself after it drops its seeds to the ground. I was overwhelmed by this sense of love and sacrifice and had to learn about this tree a lot more. The tree grows to about 30 meters as a hardwood tree, and it drops its seeds and then dies within a year. It's monocarpic and it grows mostly in Costa Rica and Colombia. The death of this tree creates this massive gap in the forest canopy. So the seeds of this tree that have fallen onto the ground can then receive sunlight and nutrients from its leaves and branches. The trouble is when you type in suicide tree, there's another tree really well known as the suicide tree, the Cerebra odolum, or otherwise known as pong pong, which grows mostly in Asia and in India in particular. And the pong pong tree has become meaningful because the pods are used as a euthanasia tool, because it's such an effective product for actually arresting the heart. So I had to compare these two trees as I was thinking about it. But as a suicide tree, the Akhtar-Khavari vesicular, as it kills itself to give life to its next generation, it seemed like it was a socially embodied living thing. And by that, I mean, its physical life is much more meaningful than simply thinking about it as being made up of mechanisms and units of cellular growth. This tree was clearly more than just a trunk or seeds that it produced and a single object within a forest, for instance. This was important for me because as a lawyer, as an environmental lawyer, I'd always seen the law treating the trees, treating plants, and treating non-human beings as autonomous, singular living things, and mostly often actually ignoring them when we even start to think about them holistically in terms of an ecosystem. So the Akhtar-Khavari, the suicide tree, was socially significant without human beings doing anything to it. So viewed across a longer time scale, the Akhtar-Khavari vesicula seemed to sacrifice. It seemed to love rather than just survive and prosper by competing for resources within a forest. Could it be that by reducing the time scale through which we view life, we also prioritize capitalist ideals of competition, of autonomy and individuality that the law then prioritizes? In other words, for me, the law narrowed our views of trees and shaped how we actually thought about them. The idea of autonomy and the short time frames that we think through get in the way of thinking more deeply about how everything is socially constituted and embodied. Sacrifice and love as social realities helps us to see how a tree like the Akhtar-Khavari, the suicide tree, is socially embodied and constituted. I have to confess, I've never seen this tree and I've only read about it in books and journals. However, I've experienced the joy, the exhilaration, happiness when I've shared the story of this tree with friends, colleagues, and strangers. Sharing its story has connected me to the tree, but also to others with whom I have shared its stories. Every time I've spoken about the Akhtar-Khavari, the suicide tree, with someone or within a group, I've witnessed genuine smiles on people's faces, and on occasions people get excited because they can relate to what the tree is doing and experiencing. I've witnessed people get goosebumps, shed tears, and make a personal connection with the story of the suicide tree because they have too loved and sacrificed themselves. More interestingly, for me, sacrifice is usually seen as a quality displayed by people and human beings. It's a sign and a symbol of what it's like to be virtuous. People may or may not act consciously when they sacrifice. The suicide tree, the Akhtar-Khavari, not only provoked the people I spoke with to think differently about trees, it made them connect with and share stories about sacrifice and love in their own lives. This tree, I felt, connected people to it, even though they had never heard of it or seen it. So for me, the Akhtar-Khavari is helping me imagine different foundations for the law, foundations that aren't necessarily rooted in competition, in autonomy, in singularity, in relationships that don't value the type of entanglement that love and sacrifice prioritize and empower us to relate to. And so I think for me, the suicide tree is a bold push into an imaginative zone for the law that I think we need more time for. And I might finish at that point and take questions later.
Well, thank you very much, Afshin, for reminding us of the important social dimension of plants and the ways in which they, in many aspects, resemble also human social relations. I would like to move on to Sabina Aguilera now, who is going to be talking to us about peyote. Sabina, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. I need to share my screen, so I'll do that now. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about the peyote plant. Thank you very much. And before I start, I just want to mention that this contribution, the contribution for the project would not have been possible without Maria Luisa Chacarito, a Raramuri woman from the northern Mexican Raramuri people, a dear friend, colleague, and wise teacher, and unfortunately she cannot join us today. So I'm a Mexican ethnologist who ended up living in Berlin, but still have not lost the connection with Mexico. And speaking of connections or interconnectedness, it is possibly this what for me at this moment defines the relationship or this experience of reflecting about the plant mind and the relationship to us humans. So I will tell a short story that becomes more and more meaningful because it shows, to me at least, this never-ending possible interconnections. So around 2010, I read Jeremy Narby's book, The Cosmic Serpent, DNA and the Origins of Knowledge, while I was doing field work among the Raramuri people. And I was learning how to weave, and at the same time understanding that the textile, the weaving process, and the designs woven on it, these designs composed by steps, zigzags, spirals, triangles, were part of a larger story that had to do with the path of life, with the moment when life began. So I was actually quite shocked that what the Raramuri were teaching me and sharing with me was so close somehow to what Jeremy Narby wrote in his book about the Ashaninka from the Peruvian Amazons. And what triggered my attention towards plants while working with textiles, and what was in Jeremy's book as well, was that when asking how does the healer know what plants are useful to use to heal, I was explained that the plants were the ones telling the healer when they were able to heal or damage. And that is that they were speaking or communicating with the plants. And well, many times as anthropologists doing field work and listening to the stories around activities or objects being made, we are confronted with our own beliefs and worldviews. And despite being truly respectful with what I was being explained, and many times I had anyway a hard time understanding these facts as real or as part of the world I felt part of. However, a chain of events such as the connections with Jeremy Narby's writing and then later on being in touch with Monica Gagliano and reading her amazing experience and work, and now being here, I think that it is not so crazy to think this is real. So all this is revealing because there is no turning back. And in this sense, I feel challenged to deepen even further into the textile world because it is also related to the plant realm. And in fact, among the Raramuri and other peoples as well, before synthetic or woolen yarns were used, textiles were woven plants. And in ancient stories from different Mexican peoples, stories that are still alive today, the world is said to be woven with a kind, in the beginning, with a kind of grass when everything was covered with water. And this is what made the surface solid in the moment of creation. What I have learned about the motifs woven on the Raramuri textiles, which can also be found in rock painting, facial painting, or petroglyphs, has to do, I think, at least in the textiles, with what could be referred to as a language of the plants, maybe. And thinking about this for the northern Mexican context where I'm working was inspired by reading about the Peruvian Amazon people, especially the Ashaninka and the Shipibo-Conibo. But first I'll talk about the relationship with the peyote, the plant we talked about in this project. And it is called hikuri in Raramuri language. It is a cactus which has hallucinogenic properties and is considered to be very wise, an elder as well. I have had the intention to go back doing fieldwork and talk further with the elders and, when possible, with the healers about the possible connections with the textile designs. What I have been told is that these designs are the paths of the healers as well, apart from being the path of life, when they walk through the different layers of the world. But what interests me now is that within the healing ceremonies, too complex to explain in detail here, where peyote is consumed, a ritual instrument called a rasper is used to communicate with the peyote spirit, that is the healer's ally, so that the healer will know where the patient's soul is and thus be able to be cured. I use these images of a museum collections here because I don't have a picture of myself of this instrument. This communication is possible not only through the sound produced by the instrument, but also by means of the healer's chant, which is always different according to what the healer has learned or knows what to think. Among the Shipibo Konibo, according to what I have read, the designs in the shamanic visions, which are reproduced by the women on cloth, textiles, and other objects, can also be manifested as chants. And well, these images or designs are also those of the cosmic serpent, and they represent the structure of the universe, which coincides with what the Raramuri people have explained to me regarding the textiles and its motifs. So all these interconnections are what are keeping my mind very excited to keep reflecting upon and working further with the Raramuri and other peoples who don't need actually to reflect on these questions, because for them it is a given, it is a part of a way of being in the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sabina, for making us reflect on this interweaving, on this interconnection between plants and human cultures throughout the world. And I would like then to ask Rachel Gagen to do her presentation on Iboga. Rachel, please.
Thank you so much. I feel so honored to be able to be a part of this. I'm on the Sunshine Coast in Kabi Kabi country, and Gaia has totally delivered today. It's a really, really gorgeous day here. So I'm just arriving here like really raw, because I feel like this is the best way that I can honor the teachings of Iboga. And I've been working with this plant over the last 5 or so years. And when I was offered an opportunity to submit something for this book, I really wanted it to be good. I really wanted to be accepted. So I'm sitting there trying to write a poem and arriving there with so much thinking, like delving into the past and trying to draw on all of my recollections and reflections on this plant. And of course, my creative energy was like not able to be accessed. And it wasn't until I just really let go of this thinking mind and this achieving mind and the way that it likes to make things a certain way, and just surrendered into the moment. And it was, and the creative energy is just there. So it's not even like something to ask a question and answer about. It's just suddenly like all of the energy of this plant is alive in me. And I'm able to be accessed. And I feel like this is part of a big teaching of the Iboga, is being a root herb from Africa. And the root herbs are always deep lessons of the earth, which generally has lessons in like the I am, like who am I made of? And so just coming like very much into the present moment, rather than being like this big narrative of everything we bring, but just fully arriving here. And so that's how I was able to write my submission. And again, the process today, as I was preparing for the talk, is like, oh, I want to be received in a certain way, or how am I going to present information on this plant? Like, which part of the plant am I going to speak to? And it wasn't until I really gave up on all of those ideas that I was able to fully arrive. And when I arrived, there was a realness and a rawness and like a spark of creativity inside me. And I remembered that, this is the message of the Iboga, like fully arriving in the moment, not with these narratives from the past, but with the deep trust that everything is here. And that when we come here, we can see how it is for each other. And this is one of the things that really lights me up in the world, because when we all fully arrive in the moment, we get to experience emergence. And emergence is when the sum of all of the parts don't add up to what the whole is. Like there's something else in that mixture. And it's something really magical that happens when hydrogen and oxygen form water. And like, who could have imagined that that would be the outcome? And who could have imagined that when billions of bacteria would inhabit our gut, that it would be capable of creating neurotransmitters for us? It's the emergence of something new when two self-organized systems of consciousness merge. And these have been big lessons for me working with entheogenic plant medicine, and which Iboga is. And I feel that the entheogens are like these celebrities in the herb world. They get a lot of press, they get a lot of attention, and they have loud voices and they speak in big visions. And all of this can be a really big distraction from what their messages are at the heart, what the messages are for ourselves, which are often very simple, very much about arriving in the moment and being able to tap into deep time rather than that horizontal linear time that we have created in our minds. And that when we fully step into that space, we can see how it is for each other and that everything is accessible here. So that's how I'm arriving to this talk today. And I feel like I'm pretty close to my time. So I think I'll leave it there.
All right. Thank you so much, Rachel, for taking us through this creative process, and being creative with plants was a huge part of the Mind of Plants project to begin with. So it's nice to have a talk that directly speaks to that. I would now ask Sarah to start her presentation. She's going to talk to us about the apple.
Thank you, and hi everyone. Thanks for logging in from wherever you are in the world. I want to start by acknowledging the country where I am standing, or sitting actually. It's Banjima country in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. And so I also want to acknowledge the custodians of this country, the Banjima people, and also the non-human custodians, all of whom have contributed to co-creating it, looking after it for so many generations. So I'm not going to talk too much about the apple because I wrote the apple tree essay from an apple growing valley in France. And one of the, I think, the important elements of the way plant minds and human minds interact is how human imagination and creativity is, I feel, very much shaped by the environment where said humans are and the vegetal worlds where they are embedded. And so right now I am so far from apple tree country. I will show you actually what the country that I'm on looks like. I have to share my screen, which I'm going to do now, like this. I hope this works. Is this working? Sorry. Yeah, it's working. Okay, sorry, this is Banjima country. This was last night's campsite. So very much spinifex country and gum country, not apple tree country. However, I can speak to an element that very much emerged for me in relation to the apple tree, which is the notion of a sense of home. And what does it mean for a plant to feel at home? What does it mean for a human to feel at home? And what can we human learn from and with plants in that regard? And so, as I was trying to figure out, a little bit like Rachel, what to talk about today, yesterday I was lying there in that gorge, listening to the water, looking at the tree over me and lying on a rock. And I asked the country as I was drifting to sleep, I asked for a dream to share with you all. And I didn't get one. I felt a snake and I looked up and there was a snake coming down the cliff. So I then got thinking about what that snake was helping me reflect on in relation to the apple tree story and to the country where I was standing, and to the relationship between humans and plants. And of course, the old story, the deep old ancient story of the apple tree and the snake and people came up. And I realized that I've been working here in the northwest of Australia for 4 years now, learning from custodians of different nations up here. And there are so many stories here of snakes and plants and people and water. And one of the differences that struck me from the biblical story that first came to my mind is the fact that custodians here, human custodians of this country, they still communicate. There is no running away, no guilt, no shame, no sin around the tree. There is not that disconnection that exists in the biblical story. They are still talking to the snakes and hearing them, talking to the trees and hearing them, calling them countrymen, and talking to the water places as well. So I guess this is kind of, this is not me talking about the apple, but talking about a kind of an update on that question that I asked in the essay about the apple, which is what does it mean to feel at home? And one of the lessons that I'm learning here in this spinifex and gum country and snake country is is that home or country is very much made of these relationships between humans and non-humans, and the very clearly acknowledged notion that a sense of home and country is co-created by all of these actors, human and non, together, and that communication is key to that. So I guess one of the first lessons that I learned with traditional custodians in the Kimberley, that one with especially Kunyandi teachers of mine, was to sit quietly with the trees and drink the water and eat the fruit and listen to the relationship that unfolds from and with that. So I'll stop there. I hope it's okay not to talk about the apple so much, but I can't because I'm nowhere near an apple tree. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for reminding us of the importance of rootedness and of feeling at home in the place that we inhabit. That's a crucial lesson also from this project. Now I would like to invite Jeremy Narby, who wrote on cannabis, to share his talk with us.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm gonna go into this raw, as Rachel put it. 35 years ago, I was a young anthropologist, and I was living with Ashaninka people in the Peruvian Amazon. And these people considered certain plants as teachers, plants like tobacco, ayahuasca, towe, and certain big trees, that they spoke of them as people and wise old people who could teach you things. Well, at the time, I was fresh from the materialist, rationalist suburbs. I'd been taught that plants don't have minds, and that if you thought that they did, then you were out of your mind. So I struggled with the notion of plant teacher, but I saw that for the Ashaninka, this was a very central notion, that this is with these plants, they learned about the world around them, about other plants, about anything really. There were no limits to what you could learn from a plant teacher. Well, after doing 2 years of field work and then writing a dissertation in anthropology that really didn't deal with this question, it dealt with the rational uses of rainforest resources by an indigenous people in a political economic context of development and so forth. Still, there was this question that I was interested in, which is, what do the Ashaninka mean when they talk about a plant as a teacher? And I decided, living in Switzerland, to cultivate cannabis and treat it like a teacher. Why cannabis? Because it was the mind-activating plant that could actually grow in the place that I was living. And so I explored the idea that a plant could teach me something by consuming cannabis and doing it in the way that Ashaninka people do it. So inspired by Amazonian people, I came up with my own hybrid way of approaching this Eurasian plant. And I've been working with this plant in this way for the last 30 years. And what I've been interested in is this plant's impact on my mind. I do my thinking with cannabis. I do reading with cannabis. I edit what I write with cannabis. The book, The Cosmic Serpent, that Sabina so kindly mentioned, was written by a cannabis-inspired mind. So if you want to see what that looks like, you can just read that book. But here I'll address the question. I've been using this plant to enrich my mind for 30 years. But what does that mean about the mind of the plant? Do I think that the plant has a mind? So I've actually thought a lot about what the mind of a plant might be like, or what plants might have in mind, it's pretty clear in the case of cannabis that cannabis started producing THC long before there were human beings. And it seems to serve the purpose of discombobulating insects and pests. And so, and because we have a similar neurology to insects and other animals, what discombobulates an insect will discombobulate us. So by containing THC, the plant is not necessarily intending to discombobulate me and get me thinking in new ways. But still, I think that, well, that's the problem with 5 minutes. They kind of go by so quickly. The conclusion is, I think that it's perfectly fine to consider the plant may have a mind, not have a mind. The plant minds are probably quite different from animal minds. But with a plant like cannabis, you can see that it impacts your mind. And with your mind, it's as if the plant had a mind. And that's good enough. And so what is the mind of cannabis like? Well, the impact that the plant has on my mind makes me feel that if it has a mind, it's tricky, it's playful, it's sidewinding, and that would be my testimony of the personality that cannabis may perhaps have. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for telling us about the important role of plants as teachers for humans. I would like then to move on to Matteo Politi. Matteo is going to talk about the Ushpa Washa Sanago. We are going to play a video of Matteo, and as I said in the beginning, he will then be joining us for the Q&A as well. So the video should be playing shortly.
Okay. Yeah, we just wanted to say hi and explain that our connection isn't very good. So yeah, we'll send out videos even for mine.
See you later. Hi everyone, my name is Matteo Politi, and I'd like to share with you some thoughts I had a few days ago when I was reading again my book chapter Contribution for the Mind of Plants. This describes my first experience with the so-called medicinal plant diet, which is a Peruvian traditional way not only to treat disease, but also part of a shamanic initiation. So I describe my experience with a medicinal plant known with the name of Ushpa Washasanango in Peru. And in doing so, I used a lot of astrological consideration to try to understand and to describe what was going on to me during this diet experience in the Amazonian jungle. And then I said, such a strange pharmaceutical chemist. I am still in love with shamanism and even astrology, while most of my colleagues, especially nowadays, are dealing with virus and vaccines. And they have certainly no time to waste on this kind of old-fashioned ways to describe life and even speaking about health and disease. No time to waste. There is science, and science deals with the objective truth. So there is one truth, and even one science. Actually, I have nothing against science, but everything against those people that consider some science more scientific than another. And so, anyway, my colleagues are dealing with one truth, one health, a global health, a World Health Organization to fight even microscopic enemies, recommending drugs even before you're getting sick. Fantastic. So one health, one truth, one God. My God, this is a very old story. We all know about that. This monothematic way to approach life in general is quite boring. It's very boring, and actually, unfortunately, it belongs especially to the Western hegemonic culture, and that not by chance is a monotheistic one, with a long story of monarchies and even monocratic regimes that seems to come back again nowadays to repeat always the same monotonous story. There is an enemy to crucify, and in doing so, they unleash a new pandemonium, right? So be careful. Don't listen to only one voice. Open up your mind to listen to many diverse voices. That's why there is biodiversity in nature. No, this is useful for life. The biodiversity, not only in terms of natural entities, but also in terms of culture, different culture. And that's why, as a friend of knowledge, because actually I'm a philosophy doctor, so the word philosophy means friends of knowledge. So as a friend of knowledge, I like to listen to different ways to describe life in general and in specific topics related with health and disease, because I'm a PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry. And in doing so, I spend a lot of time studying traditional medicines. And in doing so, I discovered that there are even such different way to learn about health and disease, where the voice comes directly from nature, directly from medicinal plants. This occurred to me during the medicinal plant diet in Peru with Ushpa Sanango, and this was my first experience in this context. And I have to say that yes, I wish you to find your own way to open your mind to the mind of plants, to the mind of nature. And yes, good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Matteo, for this wonderful contribution in video, talking to us about the importance of plants, not in order to create a kind of a unified view of the world, but to foster diversity and the importance of diversity in life itself.
Thank you.
I would now ask Harriet Tarlo to give us her contribution. She's going to talk to us about samphire.
Hello, yes, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to talk to you about some new fieldwork on the northeast Lincolnshire coast of the UK that's focusing on salt marsh plants. The essay that I wrote for the Mind of Plants was on samphire, and the slides I'm going to show you are actually showing poems by myself and paintings by Judith Tucker. The relationship between them isn't completely obvious, so I'll let you have a look at that. But I hope you'll see that they're touching on things that other people have talked about. Glasswort, green pink, globular, across pools, flats, climbing under tiny banks, up to, under, tight turned buds, pale thrift, green lavender, out rooting. This is a spring samphire, and this is a winter one. Ridge ringed red in rain salt water. Winter Saint-Pierre remembers. I'm just gonna try and, sorry, I've slightly got, that's it. Pioneer, breaking salt pan, stalking, then branching, cord glass frags, spartina, green bubbles surfacing. Scurvy grass, podding up, storing water, Anglica with a catch, single serration distinguishes separation from self. Bees browse plantago up, stem, up, stigma, to wind quake, fruit flick, past dark sea rush points, breathe salt, in, out, each cell, hold water, behind yellow. And this is from a slightly longer piece where I tried to show the entanglement of samphire in the wider community of the salt marsh. So the salt marsh plants, which I'm reflecting on here, do exist in a community. And I found it difficult to kind of extract samphire out of that. So there's a much longer prose poem based around these shorter poems. And this one is more seasonal. May, samphire, Salicorna europea, seedlings pushing up on open mud, pushing up globular, not yet branching, pink-green across mud flats, salt pans, shallow pools at the creek edges, higher according to light, tide, strength, sight, climbing tiny banks, higher at bottom, shorter, struggling up, broad lush leaves of sea lavender, Limonium vulgare, occasional buds in tight turned swirl of energy, high over others, pioneering, pushing through, just stalking, not branching, under cord grass flags, Spartina anglica, Spartina maritima long gone, green out of dry stalks, slowing water down, building mud, build gutweed, bladderwrack, crab corpses, stranded over purslane sprawl. Surely more than one pattern, strong or foolish ones, individuals in relation to light, sun, place, tide, brave it, out of seed, of roots, seedings to tangle with pale, early, white, pink, thrift flowers within flower, out of bronze sheath, under singing lark sky. Low and middle marsh zones will not separate at beach edges. Even high marsh resists definition. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Harriet, for these beautiful poems and the beautiful reading. We're now on to our final speaker of the day, Giorgia Tresca, who is going to talk to us about the silver fir. And again, we'll be showing a video of Giorgia, and she will be also joining us for the discussion.
Hi everyone, my name is Giorgia Tresca. Thank you very much for this opportunity today. So I'm going to talk to you about fir, but not so much about my personal relationship to this plant, but more about my co-author Celine Chaleka and her relationship to fir and to other plants. This is always a source of inspiration to me when reflecting on the interconnection between mind of plants and mind of human beings. So I'll tell you a bit more about Celine, who is a French herbalist who was working in a laboratory in the Peruvian Amazon and became acquainted with this practice of dieting. So this idea of giving up on something, be it food, social contact, in order to make contact to the plant world, receive knowledge, receive healing, or develop your relationship to it. And eventually, through dieting, she began apprenticing as a curandera, or a shaman. And these diets really guided her back to to France. They encouraged her to learn about the plants in her environment and explore their use in herbalism. So this is what Celine did. She went back to France after years and bought land, began dieting with oak, then birch, I think, and slowly on more and more plants. And she did construct a healing system which has its similarities with the indigenous one, obviously also readopted and readapted to a different cultural and natural context. And of course, constructing healing in a way that really blurs the boundary between individual and environmental healing, between the internal body and the external environment. So the body becomes a way of communicating with the natural world, and learning about the natural world is essential to, to healing. So as this process goes on, obviously it becomes more and more inseparable from broader ecological relationships that she develops to her land and to the way she manages her land and to the way she takes care of it. And this is where we get to the story of fur. Basically, Celine is able to recognize messages from furs, pick up on them, also follow them and trust them in a way that eventually lead her to guard her land with fur. And therefore, even though this practice is obviously completely separate from the indigenous context, it still serves a strong ecological purpose. And this is where I'd like to reflect on a bit. I studied environmental anthropology. I did my master thesis on these forms of shamanism in Europe. But in my academic background, I was not taught how to connect to the plant world, not even in my job, not even in my early life. So Celine to me is really a source of inspiration in how she's able to pick up on these, let's call them synchronicity signs, messages, and not solely for an individualistic, self-fulfilling purpose, but for in a way that benefits both her and her land. In fact, these two things are not really separable. She's in very strong reciprocal relationships with her land. And this leads me a bit to reflect on what it means to diet for me as an anthropologist, or what it maybe also means for other people, is that if there is an exchange, if we have to give up on something in order to receive from the mind of plants, then we should give up on, or maybe we're in a way forced to give up on this illusion, right, of objectivity, of distance, of having this illusion of seeing things through this objective stance, but rather surrender in a way to a greater mind, another intention, and another knowledge system, another epistemology. And and this might actually, eventually, dieting can lead to a cognitive shift and to a change in our environmental behavior and attitude. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Giorgia, for this video on healing together with plants. I think we now have quite some time for a discussion, and I wanted to kick off the discussion with this idea of cooperation with plants, because I think that's something that cuts across all of the presentations we heard in this session. Cooperation with the plants, either as healers, as teachers, even as co-creators of poetry or of artworks and so on. So I wanted to ask all of you in general how you feel about this idea of cooperation with plants and of co-creation with plants, which is something that I'm also interested in my own work about plants and plants and their role as co-creators of human cultural production. So if you have any thoughts about that, I would be very happy to hear them.
Yes, just if I can, I'd like to share another thought I had concerning the word ecology, because again, I like to enter in the meaning of the word, and the word ecology means eco-logos, where logos is a discourse and eco is the house and the home, but the home in the sense of nature, no? So we are doing a discourse about nature when we deal with ecology. And so I like the idea to have this discourse together with other beings that are not humans, because otherwise we always speak between us, no, between human beings. And as I said before, even within the human beings, there is an hegemonic culture, no? And so I think if we really want to co-create the environment, so to speak about ecology, we need to involve non-human beings, other beings that are living in this planet. And so that's why I think the medicinal plant diet technique that I discovered in the Amazon, and I think is just one, maybe some of you know other techniques, traditional techniques to get in touch with nature beings. So I think we need to investigate more on this kind of techniques to allow nature beings to speak about how to manage the environment, so about the ecology. Yeah.
Anyone else has thoughts on this idea of cooperation with non-humans, be it through this kind of approach to ecology where we try to listen to the voices of animals, plants, and other non-humans, or through other means?
I think it's interesting that a lot of people on this panel have been working collaboratively, not just with plants, but with other humans. And certainly in my own work that I just showed a bit of, the fact that we're looking through painting and poetry, and that we're also researching and working with people from wildlife trusts and other areas to talk about and think about and research the plants we're interested in from all perspectives, but also just to change the perspective. So the work is very micro that I've been presenting it, and you couldn't really see the plants in the way that we see them unless you were actually on the ground with them. So sort of getting close to, and there's always going to be limitations. There's always going to be huge limitations as to how much we can talk to each other, as the person who posted in the chat implied. But yet the excitement is in using imaginative ways to try and get close to the more than human world, I think.
Yes, I'd join what Harriet just said. It's true that by working with indigenous Amazonian people, this opened me up to considering that I could cooperate with a plant and a plant could cooperate with me. And I think that the Amazonian way of talking about plants and understanding them and working with them and ingesting them and dieting them, as they say, it's when you work with the vegetal, with the vegetal, then the vegetal goes inside you. Your body is transformed by continuous ingestion of the vegetal. And if you're dealing with a plant that impacts on your brain, then you are vegetalizing your brain. And I've deliberately been vegetalizing my brain and my body for the last 30 years, as I explained. And I cooperate with the plant. I ask the plant to cooperate with me, to inform me and to vegetalize me. And then I use my vegetalized brain to think about plants. And my way of thanking the plants and of having this as a two-way cooperation is to put my vegetalized brain at the service of trying to think about plants and what they are, what they have in mind, and then to write about it and talk about it. And I think that when one has a relationship with a plant like this, it does give you greater empathy to think about, well, just what is a blade of grass? I think a blade of grass is a sentient being that perceives, learns, remembers, that knows if you're standing next to it, it's covered in millions of photoreceptor proteins, just like the ones that are inside my eyes. In other words, a plant is very different from an animal like me, but at the same time, there are many areas where one can see, well, one can have empathy with the plant. I now, having thought about what a blade of grass is with my vegetalized brain and mind all these years, I like grass. I mean, I'm not talking about the grass one smokes. I'm talking about blades of grass. Just the humble lawn that is there is already a formidable being. And so this is, the cooperation goes two ways. The plant vegetalizes me. This gives me a better appreciation of plants. And then I try to bring out ideas into the world about this and to get people to appreciate the intelligence of plants and so forth. So yes, definitely cooperation with plants is the name of the game.
I also wanted to mention something about the word nature. Among the Raramuri people, for example, this word doesn't even exist. I mean, if someone asks, and so what do you think about nature, or it's just not in the vocabulary. And for me, it was like a very clear synthesis of a way of understanding the relationship with the world and with, I mean, everything that's alive in it, and not making a priority of like humans, plants, animals. It's just like a in like the weaving in a way, like this crossing of threads is also the crossing of relationships, kind of. And I mean, with peyote, for example, that's exactly the feeling. I mean, it's the only plant I've ingested, and only once in my life. And even previous, my experience with textiles, and it was exactly this feeling of feeling part of everything else and not feeling this separation, but like just this set of relationships. And yeah, so I think that's very important to think about, to reflect upon. How do we relate with our environment, with our world, and with everything?
One thought from here, following on this question. For me, the question of cooperation with plants raises the question of exactly what you just said. How do we relate, and how do we listen? And so there are different ways, and many of you have talked about ingesting, but also through weaving, also through sitting with, and so what this thread of thinking brings up for me is what blocks that communication as well, because I think I've personally experienced some things that clearly block it, like, you know, the kind of fear that can build up after trauma, and then lack of trust, and then suddenly everything is foreign and we can't connect and we don't know how to connect. And so I think reflecting on cooperation with plants and with other beings also brings up that question of what is it that blocks that communication? What is it? Why is it that when we're little kids, it seems so easier to connect, and then some of us lose that, and what can we do to prevent it, and what can we do to, and then of course the plants come in to heal that, so as a feedback. But yeah, so I guess thinking of a question by asking another question. Yeah, just wanted to.
Can I just pick up on that? That's really interesting, but also on the things that are being said in the chat about animals, and what Jeremy also mentioned, animals, that if we can get away towards the idea of collective thinking, as Monica mentions, rather than hierarchical thinking where you have your humans, your animals, your plants in stages. And I remember when I was working on my essay that John Ryan introduced me to Travas's thought, and he writes about plants as if they're animals, and it's a really interesting sort of deturning of the way we think that animals are always going to have be more sentient than plants. So he says, you know, just as the roving animal locates potential food and moves towards it, growing plants have to identify the locations of richest support of resources in their surrounding space and grow towards them and capture them, so that their growth is like slow movement. And that way in which we think of plants as rooted and as not moving is something I've really changed when I've been working on the salt marsh, because basically those plants are incredibly agential, and that's what I'm trying to bring out in the poetry, in that they're dealing with salt water, they're dealing with rainwater, they're dealing with all the environment around them, and making these incredibly rooted kind of mind of plants mental decisions at the cellular level and at the root level as to how they can survive. And if we have that kind of respect for them and think of them as being like us and us as being like them, then that moves towards that idea that Monica was talking about, I think, in the chat there.
I was just going to come in with a quick comment, and I've really loved hearing everyone on this panel talk about things. From the lawyer's perspective, one of the things that I think you try and avoid when you want to co-create is remove the kind of violence that concepts and ideas and norms generate in society. And so I think there's a lot in our vocabulary, both in language and within our normative institutions, that actually create that violent scenarios that then avoid collectivities from developing. So even concepts like weeds, protected areas, you know, concepts that we're familiar with cause a lot of that violence that allows a deeper interaction, a much deeper engagement with the natural world and plants and trees. And I think that's a useful place to start the thinking process. Thank you, everyone, for your comments on this question, and Patricia for it.
There are a few. Someone else wanted to jump in. Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, I'll just say one little thing, which is I wonder what will happen if we don't cooperate with these plants. Like an old growth tree and potentially has more neurons than the human mind. The biggest organisms in the world are fungi and mycorrhizas. So, and we know that they respond in real time to their environment by creating, medicinal agents and toxic agents. And if we don't cooperate with them, like what are they going to do with us?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So cooperation might not be an option, right? It's a basic need. There are a few other questions coming up through the chat, so I'm just going to mention a few of them, and then I'll just let anyone who wants to jump in. So I'll mention two for now. One of them, I think it's more of a cosmic planetary question about the mind as something that we could think of as the mind of the earth as a whole, and would this earth mind, how would this earth mind connect with the minds of other planets, for instance, and what is the impact of plants in this mind of our earth? So this is something that I leave open for you. And then I'll just pick on another question so that anyone's free to answer. This one's more target and political, I guess. It's about the issue of law. And when we talk about animal rights and animal law, we think that if we give animals rights, then how can we treat them also as something we consume, for instance, as something that we eat, that we own, and so on. And so the question was, would the same also not apply to plants? I mean, if we give plants rights, I guess the question implies is, how could we eat them? How could we use them for our daily lives, which is something that we do on a regular basis, just as we consume it as food, we use it for our clothing, for our furniture, for pretty much everything. So what would be our relationship to plants if we give them rights? So anyone's free.
I'd be happy to jump in. And I would really like to agree with what Afshin said about the violence of words. What is noticeable with plants is that any time we have tried to speak with our human words about plants and what they do, we've run into difficulties. So the word intelligence, for example, people have hesitated to apply the word intelligence to plants because they don't have brains. They've hesitated to use the word behavior to talk about plant behavior, because to behave, according to definitions, you need to move and you need to be able to see that there has been a change. And so anytime that people have, like Monica Galliano and others who have done innovative research with plants showing that plants make decisions and behave, then the words get questioned. Just the word, can a plant see? Well, plants are covered with photoreceptor proteins that are nearly identical to the ones in our retinas, but the word see, if you look in the dictionary, it means to perceive with eyes. And if you don't have eyes, then you don't see. You see, but without eyes. And so plants don't have eyes, but they do have photoreceptor proteins and they do perceive light. But still, if one is strict with words, one can't even really say that they see. So they behave without moving, they see without eyes, they make decisions without brains. And this is a challenge to our concepts and our vocabularies. And this is interesting, but it means that at each step that we think and talk about plants, each word we use, we need to question and unpack. Almost like at the customs when you go through and stop, what's in that suitcase? Each word is a suitcase and you have to see what's in it. There's often a lot of dirty laundry in our concepts. Now, the word mind, for example, if we're going to talk about the mind of plant, the mind is also one of these difficult words. I think that it's in discussions because it's important to talk about the words one uses. I'm not saying that one can't talk because our words are no good, but that one has to look at the words as one, so one has to do two things at once, use words and discuss the words one is using at the same time. The word mind has a Greek etymology that goes back to memory, and mind and memory go together. In fact, if you lose your memory, you lose your mind, but I'm getting sidetracked. But so I think that if there is memory, if what one is talking about, the planet or the blade of grass or the animal, if it can be shown that this entity has a memory, then one can probably use the word mind to talk about it. So that's just the importance of words. And I'll just finish with the question of rights, the rights of plants and the rights of animals, and then whether one can still use them or not. I think that what indigenous cultures that anthropologists call animist, animist is kind of an outside concept, but still, what animism is the recognition that we eat members of our family. Plants and animals are members of our family, and yet they are beings, they're subjects like us, and yet we eat them like they sometimes eat us too, where everybody's eating everybody. And so if you eat members of your family, what this implies is that you have to recognize this, honor them, have a conversation with them, see things from their point of view, recognize that they have a point of view. And we get back to the relationship, so that recognizing that plants and animals exist as subjects and have rights does not mean that we can't use them, but it does mean that we have to start having a relationship with them where we recognize that they have a point of view.
Thanks, Jeremy. That was a great answer to some of these questions and great points of departure. I see that Afshin has a comment as well.
I do. Thanks, Patricia. And Jeremy, what fabulous responses to those questions. I loved it. I just wanted to just put a idea out there in terms of the capitalism. I think I remember listening to a speech by Zizek where he talked about this idea that what we need to do is try and change the standards we use by means of which we measure what we see as just or unjust or real, or things that we want to continue living with. And I think what I like, Matteo, I think you made a comment about this kind of obsession with the one truth or one thing. And I think we've come to accept capitalism as the one way to organize the deep structures that shape law and institutions and so forth. And so along with all of this comes a kind of way of approaching animals and plants through legal structures that measure them in terms of commodities, in terms of what capital wants. So what we've got to do, I think, is just start thinking about new standards by means of which we want to measure what we see as acceptable and not, and embed that into the vocabulary of structures that we think will create pluralism, diversity in the way we accept things as good or bad or moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And those last two contributions have really brought to our minds these questions of value and scale, you know, because that's the problem with capitalism, isn't it? I mean, even with the plant samphire, which I've been working with, you know, the idea of a few sailors kind of stopping on a shore and taking samphire to prevent them getting scurvy in the past, or the idea now of someone like me going and picking a bit of samphire carefully, you know, just picking the top of it and taking it and eating it in a salad, is very different from somebody trying to produce it on a commercial scale, which people are already trying to do, in which case they then start to mess with its DNA, you know, and to use some kind of selective breeding and plant growth promoting bacteria. And, you know, they're already doing studies about this with a plant like samphire and with all our plants. So that's about scale and value, and keeping a degree of respect for the plant, but also keeping a degree of locality in the way in which we think about the plants that are around us, rather than making them into a sort of global product almost immediately. And can I just also say to Jeremy, of course, the way to get away, the way to really unpack language is to use it creatively, and then immediately it explodes and all the meanings are allowed to be multiple, and we're allowed to unpack them and be creative with them and think about them in different ways. But I really liked what you said.
Can I say something, especially about the first question, that if I'm not wrong, it was about the mind of plants, the mind of the planet, and maybe the mind outside, no, our planet. Just to say that plants, in the end, well, especially when I teach to my student about plants and how they transform the solar light into organic chemistry. So if we read that this, we all know about that, no? The solar light, they convert the solar energy into chemistry, organic chemistry. And then if we read that this event like a sort of catching universal messages and transforming it into our world dimension, then we as animals and humans, we eat the organic chemistry that those plants create, no, here on Earth. In a way, we need to thank the plant world, because they are passing us universal messages. So in the end, here in Italy, we have Stefano Mancuso, that is a collaborator also of Monica Gagliano. And when I was reading a book of Professor Mancuso, he said, if we count the mass of plants in the world, we as animal, we are like traces, no? Trace. So the plants, they know how to stay in this world, in this planet, because they are everywhere. And so we can learn from plants how to stay in this planet. And probably they know much better than us how to stay on this planet because they are receiving message from the universe. So these are strange thoughts, but I think I wanted to try to answer the first question.
I think this was a beautiful way to end our session. I just got a message in chat saying that it's unfortunately time for us to come to a close. I would like to thank everyone who participated in the session, and we have now some closing remarks, and so I invite you all to stay in the live feed and accompany us in this very last section or segment of this symposium. Thanks everyone for being here.